Hey everybody, so this video is part of Educational Series Part 3 video. It's number 3 because it's one of the most important videos. That's really what infrared saunas, what makes them infrared saunas. It's about emitters, the actual elements inside on the walls that are emitting the infrared, that are then penetrating your body. Okay, so this is very important to really take a close look at because this is intimately tied to the efficacy of a sauna. And by efficacy, by the way, I use that term a lot. Simply what I'm trying to say is that that particular aspect of the sauna is what should have the biological effects that we're desiring, and that those effects are aligned with what we would maybe come to expect from the studies or the therapeutic possibilities from infrared. So I would say this as a general term, that whether it's an old third generation, second generation, or first generation carbon or ceramic element, or a combo, or hybrid as they call it really, what we have to focus on is all of these different emitters have efficacy, not to confuse you, but at varying levels. And there's your key. So, for example, 90% at least of carbon saunas, okay, and are first off made from one of the big 4 manufacturers in China. Okay, but second, they're older generation carbon emitters. Okay, so they're technology that's been around maybe in the heating industry 40 years, okay, and it hasn't changed at all, regardless of what a lot of these companies claim as the new improved version. They claim it's a new generation. Some of them are, okay, but a lot of them claim it, and when you really look at the actual specifications of the device, they're the same old generation they came up with a long time ago, which is essentially a piece of plastic sandwiched in between fiberglass and heated up, okay, with some wiring, and then gluing some polyester onto the surface of that. It's usually black. Sometimes you'll see gray, but it's usually black to mentally remind people of charcoal, which is black. But it's not, I'm sorry, remind people of carbon, right? And we think of carbon, charcoal, that being that color, but it's just glued on polyester. And glue is not the best thing to use, by the way, of course, for off-gassing reasons. So, yeah, they all have efficacy, so that statement's interesting. What I'm saying is, according to studies on infrared, what we know is there is, on the electromagnetic spectrum, a range of infrared frequencies, and that all of those do stimulate the specific areas that are photoreceptors. They stimulate the cells, not equally, but they do have a type of action on the body that is therapeutic or helpful. But as I discussed in my first video of this series, what we have found is that parts of that electromagnetic spectrum, remember that it comes back to the cells, and the cells have more of their organic range that they operate on, okay? So ideally you want emitters that are more tuned to that range. It can still incorporate other ranges there, but if you have a choice, and you can, it's good to purchase saunas that stay closer to that range that is most stimulatory to the cells, okay? And that's going to give you more of a shot at getting that good efficacy and getting those health benefits that we all read about. And we're trying to get those same results we've seen in studies, okay? So what I'm saying is that the key to really get into analyzing emitters of various brands to see where they fall on that spectrum, okay, and which one might have then more efficacy, is what's called a spectroscopy analysis. So that's a big mouthful there. But basically, that kind of came out of or is more commonly used in the laser industry. And I do have that product category, therapeutic laser industry, on my website. People are using infrared from that means for a variety of treatments. So spectroscopy analysis essentially means that you have a spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies, okay, light waves, and it's a device or way of measuring the emission, the emissivity that's coming off of some sort of emitter, okay, or diode for that matter. And that could be an LED, could be a laser, could be a flashlight, could be a carbon panel, whatever it is, okay. So what's interesting is that that kind of information is pretty darn important. It's very scientific. It's a surefire way to know exactly what light frequency, what range is coming off. Now, most companies haven't spent the money to get that analysis. Some have. And also it's possible that there has been some third-party studies analysis of this, of some of these industrial heaters that are being put inside of infrared saunas. Okay, and there's also ways that I have measured with some different types of gear. For example, thermography. Okay, so it's a camera that analyzes the infrared signature of anything. They use it to find leaks, hot air leaks, how hot your attic is, and analyzing buildings and energy efficiency, to analyzing circulation issues in your body, or it's a great alternative for mammography because cancer in the body usually has a lower temperature than the surrounding cells, so you can catch it years ahead in some cases. So with a thermographic camera, that's one thing I request. Some more companies have done that. They've done like an analysis of their emitters with the camera, and that allows us to see the temperature variance across the panel, which actually does provide a lot of good information, and I'll explain why in a second. But also myself, you'll see in some of my videos that basically what I've done is taken an emitter, like the actual part, on request from each company that was willing to actually send me one. And it's no coincidence some companies just, they don't even have the parts, one, or they're not willing to send it for multiple reasons. But with the camera, I'm able to actually analyze and look at that myself, because unfortunately, you can't always trust a company that does its own studies, essentially. So you always try to want to look for something independently verified. And so I have done that with a variety of emitters. And just in a few cases, it didn't quite match up with what a company had sent me when I requested this type of analysis and information. So why is using thermographic imaging helpful? Because what we have found is that different types of elements, including organic, by the way, depending on where their temperature is at, that influences the actual light spectrum that is being released from it. So what we have found with both tourmaline, crystals, amethyst, jade, to fiberglass, plastic inside of it, ceramic, nano carbon that's molded, all these different materials, right, that emit infrared that is known. What's interesting is what they all have in common is that they release somewhere around the 9.4 micron range of wavelength. That's the more stimulatory range of infrared that your cells normally emit. All of them will emit around that range when they're all somewhere around 100 degrees or 98.7 degrees, which is what your body emits. So it's very fascinating, actually, that these other elements also will emit right around the same range, very much around your body temperature. And I'd explain why, but be a little bit longer and probably not all that helpful, just really interesting for some people. But so what that means is that if all of these different elements are emitting around 9.4 at 100 degrees, doesn't that mean they're all equal? And the answer is no. So that gets into emissivity ratings. It's a fancy term. So it's actually a way of measuring the fluence, or how much photons, how much light waves energy, joules of energy is one way to analyze it also in the body. But it's a way of actually rating and seeing the conversion of electricity, remember, because you're plugging in the sauna, how much of that electricity is being then converted into, through the emitter, into infrared light waves, okay? And in general, this is true, this statement. One of the common differences between those very common carbon panels that are in about 90% of saunas, which are usually the older generation ones, again, except for a few companies. Generally true, those carbon panels are about half as efficient as ceramics. And so I can use like one analogy. It's like comparing an incandescent bulb that's 100 watts to a 100 watt halogen light bulb. Okay, and those halogen light bulbs put off a lot more infrared. This is part of why they're brighter, literally. And you can put your hand near it. Put your hand near a 100 watt halogen light bulb, and you can definitely melt plastic and things like that. Not that I've ever tried that. It's just what I've heard. But you know, it's very different than a 100 watt incandescent bulb. Okay, and that has to do with how light is actually, the infrared is actually being diffused. Okay, so it can get a little technical. I'm not totally going to get into it, but the analogy is good. It's very accurate, and so they would have different ratings. Okay, and different ways of measuring both their luminance and also in the body, how many joules of energy are being delivered in infrared. There's all sorts of different things, which, by the way, then would be measurable with a thermographic camera. So I've also done thermographic imaging analysis of myself or my associate or a friend when they were doing sauna sessions in different brands of sauna, keeping it, of course, at the same temperature, and basically seeing, you know, if they sit in this one person, they sit in this one person, they sit in this one person, are there any cold spots, you know, on their body where infrared is not directly being, you know, saturated to their body? That's very telling. You can find cold spots that way. You can learn a lot about the emitters, difference between flat emitters and convex. One puts out a wider beam, and so you're going to see more of an even distribution of infrared, and of course a higher temperature and better circulation in those areas. So thermographic imaging is then tied to temperature. Okay, so we can also do the imaging of the emitters themselves. And again, carbons are about 40-something% of the electricity. Just depends. They convert to electricity. Ceramics are about double that. Okay, they're way up there, 90-something%. There's some slight variances between ceramic manufacturers. Okay, which they're all overseas, with the exception of TheraSauna, that brand, which does manufacture their emitters in the United States. They're the only company that does that. It's unusual. But so that's some of the main differences. Is if you sit in a carbon, the common, I'd say it was a complaint or feedback, they're not too happy about it, is that it's very mild. It's very cool almost, even if you have it at a warm temperature. It also takes a pretty long time to warm up. But when you think about it, it makes sense. Even if you align a sauna with carbon panels, which is exactly why they're lining all the walls and they're everywhere, is because they're very low wattage, watt density, so they're not able to put out a lot of stream of infrared, and their conversion is very weak, so they need a lot of them. The main reason they have a lot of them, though, is because they have to warm up the sauna. So they don't want somebody walking in there and, you know, they may be getting the benefits of the infrared behind them and in front of them and the sides, and, you know, it's hitting their body, and that's good, but they would have a hard time selling the sauna if somebody got in there and changed the thermostat temperature to 130 degrees and it took 3 hours to get up to that temperature. The person's like, this is a sauna. I need 130 degrees. I mean, come on, are you serious? So really, most of the panels in there, they need so many just to heat up the space, even if it's a small sauna. They need a lot of them, just to heat up the temperature in a respectable, convenient period of time, so you're not sitting there waiting forever. That's the main reason. If you were, if you're just seeking the infrared exposure to your body, and you're okay with it being a little cool or whatever, then yeah, I mean, you need a fraction of the actual emitters that are in some of these carbon saunas. Okay. So this brings us now to another important topic, which I'll discuss in the next video, which is about the mechanisms of detoxification, what's really important with infrared exposure. And let me see if I have any other points off the top of my mind between the brands. So again, over the years, I've analyzed all the different, emitters. Again, there's differences in how much infrared can be produced and be converted. There's also differences in how the panels are positioned in the sauna or shaped, which can affect if your body's getting that direct exposure. And for some people, they might sit in this ceramic brand, for example, and feel like there's cool spots, and they're not getting direct exposure, and they have to keep shifting their position. Meanwhile, in a different one that's a hybrid, let's say, carbon ceramic, it feels like there's just total saturation everywhere, and the panels are convex. So all these kind of different aspects you also have to look at with the emitters. And then you try just only a few companies, very few, have actually put the R&D, research, and the money into doing the right analysis on their emitters and trying to find a unique way to put out that 9.4 microns of very stimulatory wavelength, but at the same time being able to warm up the sauna temperature that you desire. So it's an interesting kind of tricky thing. You kind of keep those emitters around 100 degrees so they put out that right range, but you also have to be heating up the sauna in a reasonable period of time that would be way past 100 degrees, 120, 130, 140, 150. Anyways, if you have any more questions, please leave a reply or fill out a ticket.